New round of political reform consultation to be launched next week. Shanghai police under scrutiny over stampede. And underwater detection now key to the search for doomed AirAsia plane.
Good evening. Sources say the government will launch the second round of public consultation on political reform on Wednesday. Today, local politicians weighed in on a proposal that will give voters a none-of-the-above option if they don't support any of the chief executive candidates. Rani Samtani has our top story tonight.
Basic Law Committee member Albert Chen recently proposed adding the option of none of the above for voters in a future chief executive election under universal suffrage. Today, National People's Congress Standing Committee member Rita Fan said she thinks it is a feasible idea.
Professor Chen's proposal, as far as I can see, is not contradicting the basic law. However, I believe the actual situation in Hong Kong should also be taken into consideration. Hong Kong's elections, there are the district council's election, the legislative council's election, and there is a way, there is a usual practice in how to deal with blank votes. So I believe this matter deserves further consideration and discussion.
In the Legislative Council and District Council elections, blank ballots are considered invalid. Chen has proposed that if voters do not support any of the CE candidates, they can cast a blank ballot. Should the number of such ballots exceed 50%, the election will be declared void and the entire electoral process would have to be restarted. Law Chi-kwang, a founding member of the Democratic Party, also says Chen's proposal is worth considering.
If you regard to its acceptability to the Beijing government, I would say it is even more acceptable than some of the other recommendations, because this 50% none of the above thing is a very high threshold, and if really in the community has such a strong reaction towards the outcome of the election committee, I would say this is basically a safety valve for that process.
Law said the proposal should be considered during the second round of public consultation. Chief Secretary for Administration Carrie Lam is now expected to launch the exercise at the Legislative Council meeting on January 7th. Rani Samtani, TVB News.
The Legislative Council Secretariat plans to reopen the LegCo protest zone, but it'll be proposing tougher guidelines for demonstrators there. Liz Yoon has more.
Dozens of people can still be seen camping outside the Legislative Council along Timei Avenue. Many of them have been staying here after authorities cleared the LegCo protest area last month. The demonstration zone is still closed. The LegCo Secretariat will meet on Monday to discuss reopening the protest area and future arrangements. According to existing regulations, demonstrators are not permitted to stay in the protest zone for more than 48 hours. Sources say tougher guidelines will be proposed. For example, protesters would only be allowed to stage rallies between 7 a.m. and 11 p.m., and they will be forbidden to bring tents to the area. Anyone who fails to comply could be prosecuted under the Legislative Council Powers and Privileges Ordinance. Legislator Ip Kwok Kim of the Democratic Alliance for the Betterment and Progress of Hong Kong said the protest area is open to different groups and it's inappropriate for individuals to occupy the zone for a substantial period of time. He added that there's no need for protesters to carry tents with them. Pacific Party lawmaker Kenneth Chan believes such restrictions would deny protesters of their rights.
LegCo is supposed to be, constitutionally speaking, a place where public opinions would be freely expressed. All these public angers, preferences would be vented out. They would be expressed in different manners according to the protesters.
Members of the public are supposed to apply to the LegCo Secretariat to stage demonstrations in the area. Chen also suggested the Secretariat consider applications on a case-by-case basis to see if protesters can stay overnight. Liz Yun, TVB News.
Authorities in Shanghai have admitted that police underestimated the number of people expected to gather at the Bund for the New Year countdown, where 36 people were killed in a stampede. The youngest fatality was just 12 years old. More than 30 people are still in hospital, with at least 3 in serious condition. Family members were arranged to see their deceased loved ones in a funeral home today. Grief-stricken, some could barely walk back out. Authorities today released the names of 32 victims. Most of them were young people under 30 years old. The youngest was a 12-year-old. The family of a Taiwan woman who died in the tragedy arrived in Shanghai today to identify the body. She was on a business trip with 2 co-workers when they joined the New Year gathering. Both of her colleagues were hurt. Shanghai police said 700 officers were at the site on New Year's Eve, with another 500 dispatched to the Bund when the stampede happened. Mainland media reports questioned the small number of police versus the crowds of tens of thousands of people. Reports said authorities had arranged for a lighter police presence because, unlike in previous years, no large-scale countdown event was held at the Bund. The police admitted that a sudden influx of people around 11:30 that night left officers unable to get through to the core of the gathering to maintain crowd control. But the government is still looking into the exact cause of the tragedy to see how such an accident could be prevented in future. Last night, many people placed flowers and lit candles in Chenyi Square in the historic Riverside area in remembrance of the victims. Most of the New Year Day events scheduled in the city were cancelled, including a large-scale light show. Landmark skyscrapers also turned off their usual lighting decorations.
The investigation into the AirAsia crash is going underwater. International experts with sophisticated sonar equipment are joining teams scouring the Java Sea for the wreckage of the plane that went down on Sunday on its way from Indonesia to Singapore. 22 bodies have now been recovered, 4 of which have been identified. James Aiken reports.
A U.S. search helicopter returns to a military base after another grim mission. The crew has recovered the bodies of more AirAsia crash victims, which will be sent for identification by relatives. This woman's son and his wife were going to Singapore for a holiday. She's still waiting to learn if any of the bodies found so far could be them. More than 20 ships from Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Japan, and the U.S. are taking part in the search operation, which is focusing on a 14,000 square kilometer area of the northern Java Sea. Since the plane crashed in shallow seas, experts are hopeful they'll be able to find the all-important flight data and cockpit voice recorders. Recovery workers say it's likely they're getting closer to the fuselage, which, if intact, may contain the remains of many of the crash victims. But bad weather, which has hindered the search for the past several days, remains a worry. Today, search officials showed pieces of the wreckage that have been recovered, each one a possible clue in explaining what might have went wrong. The Airbus A320 with 162 people on board went down minutes after the pilot told air traffic control he was approaching threatening clouds. Investigators are working on a theory that the plane stalled as it climbed steeply to avoid the storm. They say they are looking at every aspect to pinpoint the cause of the crash, including operational, technical, and human factors. Meanwhile, in Indonesia's second-largest city of Surabaya, where the flight originated, people gather to pray as they remember those who died in the crash and the families who've been left behind. James Aiken, TVB News.
Japanese Emperor Akihito has delivered his New Year greetings, wishing peace and happiness to the people of Japan and around the world. Thousands of people gathered in the Imperial Palace courtyard to listen to the annual address. 13 imperial family members joined the 81-year-old emperor and his wife, Empress Michiko. Akihito also called on his people to reflect on history and the country's wartime past. Crowds waved flags and shouted, "Long live the Emperor!" The Emperor's New Year address is one of 2 opportunities in which he directly addresses the public. The other is his birthday in late December.
Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff was sworn in to a second term in office Thursday. As Alan Buckner reports, she's facing huge challenges, including a moribund economy and an ever-expanding corruption scandal at a state-run oil company.
With investors fleeing Brazilian assets in disapproval of her management of the economy and a possible downgrade of the country's national debt hinted at by at least one ratings agency, Rousseff pledged to pursue more market-friendly policies. Among those attending her inauguration, Vice President Lee Yuan-Chao and U.S. Vice President Joe Biden. The White House is still seeking to repair a damaged relationship with Brazil following revelations by spy agency leaker Edward Snowden that the U.S. National Security Agency had monitored Rousseff's communications. In her 40-minute speech, Rousseff defended her record, noting strides made in social inclusion in government programs. But now she's faced with belt-tightening. Without providing specifics, she promised measures that would minimize pain for average Brazilians who rely on the government for social welfare benefits. The cuts are likely to hinder what's already expected to be a tough year for the Brazilian economy. Also complicating things for Rousseff is a scandal at state-run oil firm Petrobras that's already seen 39 people arrested on graft-related charges. 2 Petrobras directors and dozens of construction executives are accused of channeling money from overpriced contracts to bribe officials and politicians. Next month, the Supreme Court is expected to reveal the names of legislators who allegedly received funds from the more than $3 billion in kickbacks. The scandal sparked huge protests across the country. Rousseff herself was chairman of Petrobras when much of the alleged graft took place. She has denied any knowledge of the corruption. She's now pledged to send an anti-corruption bill to Congress in the first half of this year. Alan Buckner, TVB News.
And still ahead in the news tonight. Government and chicken traders still at odds over poultry distribution. Renowned French economist snubs his country's top honour. And Manchester City catch up with Chelsea in the Premiership.
Who is that? That is Sirius Black. He's a murderer.
Saturday night.
Why would I go looking for someone who wants to kill me? I'm gonna kill him. Specto Patronum!
Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban on Pearl's weekend blockbuster. We are surprisingly similar in a lot of ways, but do you know what really sets us apart?
We come into the world seemingly knowing much less about the world than almost any other animal. You're an obligate learner.
Monday night, Well-Being, the last episode, What Makes Us Human, at 9:30 on Pearl. Killer whales get a bad rap, but research is revealing these whales to be highly intelligent.
I stumbled into the existence of a dialect system that I really had no idea existed.
And even caring creatures.
Selfless behavior.
Tuesday, Killer Whales, the ultimate guide, at 8:30 on Pearl's Loving Nature. The time now is 7:43. The time check was brought to you by Seiko.
Welcome back. The government says there's little room for concessions in a dispute with poultry traders over dispatching arrangements. Authorities suggest the use of smaller vehicles to transport chickens, but traders say that won't work. Stephanie Cho reports.
During the 3-week closure of the Chengshaowan temporary wholesale poultry market as part of the campaign against bird flu, local chickens will be dispatched to retailers via the Takuling checkpoint after passing inspections. Chicken traders are concerned that the system would require more resources and have decided to suspend their business. They have been discussing with the government ways to shorten the process.